Good afternoon. Welcome, and thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us this afternoon. My name is Melinda Cheel. I'm the Senior Manager of Marketing Communications here at RSF, and I'm joined by Don Schaefer, our President and CEO.
Hi, all.
We've really been looking forward to today's webinar. This Q&A format is new for us, and we are planning to host other conversations throughout the year, and we'd love to get your input. So just as a plug, we'll be sending a feedback survey tomorrow morning and would appreciate your thoughts on today's webinar and then any suggestions you may have for future topics. For today, Don is going to take the first 15 minutes or so to speak about our work and how it reflects our purpose to transform the way the world works with money. Then we'll use the remaining time for questions and answers. So there's two ways that you can ask questions. You can type in a question into the GoToWebinar question box, or you can raise your hand. So if you're looking at your screen right now, you'll see on the left is an image of the collapsed control panel, and if you click on that bottom icon that's there, the hand with the arrow over it, when you click on that, that's raising your hand. You also can type a question into the question box, and if you don't see that, click on that top arrow that's in orange, and that will expand your control panel, and you'll see the question box there. When we get to the Q&A session, we'll alternate between taking questions from the folks who are raising their hands and from those who are coming in through the question box. Just be aware that if you raise your hand and I call your name, that means I'm going to unmute you, and then you can ask your question. We have over 40 people on the line already. Hopefully we will get to everyone's questions, but if we don't, we will follow up with you later. Also, please note that if you're having trouble with your computer's audio, please phone in using the information that was provided in your registration confirmation email. Okay, I think that's it. We're ready to get started. You ready, Don?
I am.
Okay.
Thanks, Melinda. Hi, everybody. It's another terrible day of weather here in the Bay Area. Just so you know, for those that are around the country, it's about 75 degrees with minimal wind and lots of sun. So we're here in the Presidio in San Francisco, and Melinda is going to help me go through an incredibly complex slide deck here the next little while. And as she indicated and as advertised, the main purpose and our hope is that that I can be responding to a lot of good questions and comments, observations that you all have. So I'm going to give a little bit of an overview of RSF and our purpose, why we exist, and a little bit about what we do. And my assumption is that many of you are pretty familiar with what we do, so hopefully this won't be too redundant or repetitive to what you already know. But why don't I just start with our statement of purpose here at RSF, which is to transform the way the world works with money. And that often begs the question, towards what? Transform the way the world works with money from what to what? And the way I most often respond to that is to say that that we live in a world where financial transactions are complex, opaque, and anonymous based on short-term outcomes, and where I believe we're making some significant progress actually right now, and over the last 5-10 years specifically, is to a world where financial transactions are more direct, transparent, and personal based on long-term relationships. So that's one of our stated values, is that people are best served by financial transactions that are direct, transparent, and personal based on long-term relationships. And it's kind of a deceptively simple phrase, because we put everything that we do through that filter or through that lens, and you'd be amazed, how it can work to focus, our attention and hopefully, model work in the culture of money that we have that can be pointing us in a good direction. And of course, we have many peers and sister organizations, and many of you as investors and donors and people who are entrepreneurs who are running various companies and nonprofits that we take as our inspiration. And I'm going to go through a few examples of projects we're supporting here in a moment. Last month was our 30th birthday, I should point out. It was in March 1984 that we made our first loan to a Waldorf school in New Hampshire called Pine Hill Waldorf School. And the school had burned down in 1984, and there was a group that came together and said, what can we do to help? And the fact that the RSF co-founders were able to pull together $500,000 and make our first loan to the school is what propelled them onward to say, what else could we do, and how can we best work with money and financial transactions in a way that's reflective and inspired by the work of Rudolf Steiner. Rudolf Steiner, as many of you know, is a philosopher, scientist, commenter, and an observer, and had an acute sense of many things from architecture to medicine to economics and agriculture. And he did a series of lectures in 1922 on the subject of economics, which I highly recommend to people, in which he was able to foresee that as the world was growing and was becoming more complex, it was likely that the financial system would also become more complex and more anonymous and more opaque. And so one of the things that's in the lectures that he stresses many times is his beliefs that as the participants in a financial transaction get farther and farther removed from each other, to the degree that it's harder and harder for the participants in a financial transaction to connect with each other, that will make it harder and harder for the financial system to function in a way that serves humanity. And so that was really the origin story of RSF in 1984, and it came into fruition through this specific loan to Waldorf School. And because RSF at that time, called the Rudolf Steiner Foundation, had a whopping $6,000 in the bank at the time, and so there's no endowment. It's really through a community of people that cared about the school that came together to fund it. And so then, one by one transaction, one relationship after another, over the last 30 years, we've lent out over $300 million, and we have facilitated over $100 million in grants to social enterprises that we feel are creating substantial positive social and environmental impact in the world. And we're focused on food and agriculture, education and the arts, and ecological stewardship. So all of the projects that we work with are in one or the other of those categories. And there are 40 of us here in San Francisco. We have a little bit over $6 million operating budget. We have about $170 million in assets. So we're small. All of us can fit in one small square there, as you can see our photo from a year or two ago. And in the grand scheme of things, we're micro, but we call ourselves small and mighty oftentimes, because we try to be really innovative and do things that are hard on purpose, and support things that then later often become better understood and more mainstreamed. So we're typically working from the perspective of potency, not scale, and that's a topic I'm happy to get into more. But let me touch on a few of the projects that we support. You can see Hailey and Tatiana from Common Market Philadelphia in the upper right of your screen. They're the founders of Common Market. This is a local food distributor in the Philadelphia area. They're based in North Philly, And they started the organization about 5 years ago or so because they wanted to both support small family farms in the Delaware Valley that were having a hard time getting distribution and making wholesale, food businesses work, and they also wanted to support children and others in lower income parts of Philadelphia that were having a hard time getting access to healthy, nutritious, local organic food. And so they figured out how to connect those dots and have been enormously successful. And we started out with a $130,000 line of credit to them in 2010. A year later, that had nearly tripled the line of credit. And then about 2 years ago, we added a mortgage loan, about $1 million mortgage loan, to our work with them in order to allow them to purchase a building in North Philadelphia that's allowed them to be more financially sustainable and more in control of their destiny. And we've done some really interesting things, like pulled together a guarantee community under that loan to make it less risky, and some other things that I can talk more about. But they've been incredibly inspiring to us, and are frequently called. In fact, when I was there, this was probably 2 years ago, just as they were getting some significant momentum, and highly fielded 2 calls, one from Tallahassee, Florida, and the other one from Omaha, Nebraska, from small local food distributors that were trying to do what they were doing. And so they've really pioneered something very important that's being replicated in other places. And then Digital Divide Data, you can see in the lower left, is an organization that's based in New York City, and we've made a line of credit available to them in order to help them manage their cash flow. This is a social enterprise that their mission is to provide steady, meaningful work to people in Laos, Cambodia, and Kenya primarily, and they're now doing that with over 1,000 young people. And the Digital Divide Data employees support a range of content processing services, so things like transcription services and newspaper and magazine digitization, XML conversion, data entry, things of that nature for universities and other customers. And they recruit talented youth who wouldn't otherwise be able to have an opportunity for higher education. They give them training, bring them into meaningful work, and these young people are typically working about 6 hours a day, and they're also attending university classes with goals of graduating in 5 or 6 years. And so, these, that's another great example of a type of organization that's having impact on several different layers, and that's what we look for, whether it's common market, Digital Divide Data, where they're not only are they treating their employees well, they're providing an opportunity they wouldn't otherwise have, and there are, as I say, several layers of impact going on. And then I already talked a little bit about Pine Hill, and we've been, this is an interesting story because not only did we make that as our first loan in March of 1984, but we just made another loan to them in 2012 for their new children's village, which is an early education center that offers publicly accessible parent education program and other offerings there to the broader community. And so these are just a few examples of actual projects that we have funded in various ways. And probably the best example of how we bring people in community around financial transactions are our pricing meetings. So we have a loan fund called our Social Investment Fund that hopefully many of you are investors in. The minimum is $1,000. And we have 1,500 investors in that fund, and then about 80 borrowers that benefit from those investor dollars. It's about a $100 million fund. And every quarter, we bring together representatives of the investors, the borrowers, and RSF as the intermediary to talk about what interest rate the borrowers will pay the following quarter and what rate of return the investors will get in return for their investment. And previously, we had used a Wall Street benchmark to do this process. And about 5 years ago, we said, why are we why are we doing it that way? And we created our own process, this quarterly pricing meeting process, and the result is what we call RSF Prime, where we've essentially created our own interest rate. And so we've had 20 of these quarterly meetings over the last 4.5 years, and I try to be objective. I'm obviously quite biased, but they're really fascinating meetings. And to our knowledge, we're the only organization that has taken this approach to bring the borrowers and investors and the intermediary together. So perhaps the simplest way to think about it is that if you have a savings account at Bank of America or a CD, not to call them out, but I will, you really have no idea where that money is where that money is at any given time. It could be going to support your favorite community loan, or it could be going to clear-cut rainforests in Malaysia. You really have no idea. Whereas part of the point of all this with the pricing meetings is that you can, as an investor, come into contact with the actual projects, hear their stories, meet the founders or leadership team. And likewise for the borrowers, they typically don't have any idea where their money is coming from when they're getting a loan from a bank, except for it's this big, XYZ bank, and that's pretty much all they know. Whereas here, they can actually come face to face with the investors and know, specifically where the funds are coming from. And that introduces community. It also introduces a nice amount of accountability, because it's powerful to come into contact with the money the people whose money it actually is. That we are utilizing as the intermediary. So that's a little bit about the pricing meeting, and happy to go into more questions about that for those that may not be familiar. But there are lots of things going on in the field of impact investing these days. It's a rapidly accelerating and advancing field that we find ourselves in the center of, and I find it to be very hopeful because you have organizations like Morgan Stanley that have recently launched an Institute for Sustainable Investing and an Investing for Impact platform underneath that. And it's really encouraging to see that there is fast-growing mainstream interest for people to align their money with their values. And what we're trying to do here is to always, go one step further in trying to bring money back down to the earth, make sure that we're focused on relationships, not transactions, and it's clear, even though there's a lot of movement in the impact investing field, that there's still a long way to go in terms of that. And so maybe I'll wrap it there and see. As I say, I'm really keen to see what kind of questions you all have, and I'd say we get into conversation, but of course I can't see you and you can't see me, and you all can't respond to each other. So we'll do our best here with the technology we have.
Okay, great. Thank you, Don. So again, there's two ways to ask questions. You can, if you prefer to speak your question, you can raise your hand. So you want to look for the hand with the arrow over it and click on that. Or you can just type a question into the chat box. And we do already have some coming in. One question that someone asked was just about the other folks who are on the line. And so we have now, there's 55 people, and just skimming over the list, it's honestly quite a mix. It's definitely people from around the country. I think a couple people from outside the United States. Some are leaders of financial organizations. Some are current clients. Some names I don't recognize, but we are glad that you're all here. Okay, Don, so I'm going to start with a question that came in through the chat box, and that is, how is RSF transforming the way let me start that over. How is RSF transforming the way the world of money and finance works with the world of food and farming?
Thanks. Well, we do a lot of work in the area of food and farming. As some of you may know, Rudolf Steiner did another series of lectures. He did the one on economics in 1922, and they did a series of lectures in 1924 on the topic of agriculture, and that's where biodynamic agriculture came from, were those lectures. So we have a deep connection to agriculture, and it's been interesting. We were among the first, lenders to support organic food companies, and that industry has really grown tremendously over the last 10, 15 years. And so now what we're doing is proportionally spending more energy working closer down the value chain or backwards, in the value chain towards the farmer, in the area of processing and aggregation and distribution, because we're particularly interested in trying to help build healthy, diversified regional food systems, where the producer and the consumer of food are closer together, ideally can know each other in some way, just like I was describing with the pricing meetings. And of course, there's great momentum right now in the local food system arena, and it's hugely encouraging. And so that's where we're putting a lot of our emphasis. We also do, we have a philanthropic fund at RSF called the Local Initiatives Fund, where we do strategic grants. We also use this fund for loan guarantees, and for some work we do around shared gifting, which I can talk about if people are interested in that. It's a kind of a new way of empowering those who are receiving grants to decide amongst themselves how much each should get in a circle of grantees, and I can talk more about that. But anyway, this philanthropic fund called the Local Initiatives Fund, its purpose is to support using different kinds of capital to grow diversified regional food systems and more resilient communities. And so there we've made grants to everything from the UC Berkeley's new research center called the Center for Diversified Farming Systems, to the Greenhorns and the National Young Farmers Coalition, to a consultancy that works with small farms called Kitchen Table Advisors. We've been involved in a whole range of projects that go all the way back to the farm level. So I'd say we're getting more and more involved in the entire value chain of agriculture, and it's a huge, huge and growing focus for us here.
Okay, there's a couple questions that pertain to the pricing meeting, so I'm going to start with one here, and then we can maybe pick up a couple of the others. Let's see. So what are the tough ethical questions RSF deals with? Have you had to deal with ethical questions in pioneering the concept of quarterly pricing meetings?
I don't know that we've had to deal with ethical questions. None come to mind. I'd say that there are two things that are involved in the dynamic of the pricing meetings that are interesting, I think, related to your question. One is that you'd expect that the investors would come in and say, I need a higher return, or I'd like to have a higher return if I could, and that the borrowers would come in and say, I'd like to have the lowest interest rate that I could, so I'd have to pay less. And what happens, actually, you'd think that would be kind of a challenge in facilitating that, but actually what happens without much facilitation on our part is that invariably, I think I've been to 15 of the 20 pricing meetings, that one of the investors says, unprompted at a certain point, I'm so inspired by the projects and the impact you're having. If I had to pay a little bit more on my rates, if I had to receive a little bit less of a return on my investment, I would do that if I knew you'd be able to have more impact. And one of the borrowers, almost on cue but not solicited, says, boy, if there could be more investors like you all here, and they were attracted by having a little bit higher return, that would be supported by us paying a little bit higher interest rate, you'd be surprised how often that comes up in the meeting. So it ends up being, we thought that would be really challenging at first, but it hasn't been as challenging. The other area that's been challenging is that we, a small group here at RSF, there are 5 of us who ultimately decide, what RSF prime will be in terms of the interest rate that borrowers pay, the base interest rate, and the return to investors. And the pricing meetings, the groups there advise us. And so, most meetings, it's pretty easy to interpret what the spirit of the meeting was, and there's a general consensus, and we actually ask for kind of a recommendation, formal recommendation, and that we have a whole process around that. There have been a handful where it's been mixed, where it's been hard to read exactly. If we were going to try and base our decision purely on the feedback we've gotten from the meeting, it's been a little harder to read, and that's where we have to just do our best to represent, as I say, the spirit of the meeting. And but that can be challenging to do.
There's another question more specific about our pricing, and the question is pricing based on a minimum yield to investors plus a spread, kind of the equivalent to our operating costs?
Mm-hmm. So the way the pricing works, our current rate of return to investors is 0.25%, so 25 basis points it's called, so 0.25%. And that may sound very low, but it's actually higher than what investors would receive in a comparable CD at a bank. So that's always our goal, is to come in at or a little bit higher than the rate of return you could get in a similarly structured investment at a bank, which would be a savings account or a bank CD, because we have 100% repayment rate to investors over the 30-year period. It's very low risk, and it's quite liquid. You can get all or part of your money out every 90 days. So the combination between the low risk and the liquidity means that it functions a lot like a bank CD. And then we have a 4.25% what's called spread. So that just means that the money that we need to have good people on staff and to do a really good job underwriting and structuring these loans and doing all the community building work that we do that doesn't always fit under the heading of efficiency, provide technical assistance to our borrowers, et cetera. And so the base interest rate to borrowers today is 4.5%. It's that 0.25% to investors plus the 4.25% to us. So that's a little bit about how the mechanics work. And just so everyone knows, in our operating budget, we have about 70% of our operating budget is covered by the revenue that we receive from our lending activity, from the interest rate and fees from borrowers. About 15% is covered by the work we do in philanthropic services, so with donor advised funds and facilitating grants. And then about 15% is covered by gifts to RSF from donors. So you can think of it as we're a social enterprise ourselves, that we cover roughly 85% of our operating budget through earned revenue.
Thanks. This is great. We have a ton of questions coming in, all of them through the chat box. No one is raising their hand. I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk. There's some questions specifically about the borrower criteria, and this one is about the due diligence process. Can you talk a bit about that?
Sure. So the very first thing that we look at, and we have a very sharp team here that is focused on both of the aspects that I'll mention, but the very first thing we look at is the kind of social and environmental impact that the organization is having. The organization can be wildly profitable, have an amazing idea and timing and management team and so forth. But we have quite a high bar for what we're looking for in terms of social and environmental impact, and it varies by each of our focus areas. But we have a 5-layer tool that we've developed ourselves over the last decades that helps us to organize our thinking around How is the company or the nonprofit organization expressing itself in the world, and is their intent to have extraordinarily high impact in social and environmental sides of things. And so typically, for example, we haven't made loans to organizations that are just doing organic food, as great as that is relative to conventional food. What we're looking for are organizations that are going above and beyond that. So like a Guayaki, for example, that's a yerba mate company. They've been voted most democratic workplace for the last 5 years running from I forget which magazine. They are doing an incredible amount of rainforest restoration in Paraguay and Brazil and Uruguay. They are certified organic, certified fair trade. You can go on and on. There are about 9 different layers of, basically they would not be in business but for the social and environmental impact that they want to have. And so that's who we're looking for out in the world. And then once we cover the social and environmental impact, then we go to look at all the classic things you'd look at if you want to get paid back in a loan, which is, and from my perspective, number 1, number 2, and number 3 are usually the people, because invariably things are going to go sideways, or there'll be a roller coaster or 12 that they have to ride to get through to the next stage of their life cycle, and it's always going to be the people. So we spend an inordinate amount of time getting to know the people who are the founders or those running the organization, the boards, the other investors, and then we also, of course, spend time in the financials and trying to determine what kind of capital and how much and is appropriate, and where might this organization need some technical assistance or some help that we could be of value with, and so forth. So we look at a range of different things that ultimately sound more conventional, but we spend a lot of time on the social environmental impact and the people part of the equation.
And then a follow-up to that, how do you weigh the balance between reasonable, well-secured investments or borrowers and ideas that you just really want to happen? When do we make the leap?
That's a great question. So I don't know that we have this one down to a science, and we don't have a quota, for example, of those that we feel like are more secure rather than less secure. But we are a senior secured lender, which means that we like to be first in line to get paid back, and because the promise that we're making to investors is that this is a very low risk proposition, and so we've always had that mindset. Now, with that said, we do 2 things, as we look at organizations that are earlier stage or more risky. One is we spend a ton of time trying to help them build community around the loan. So this could be like we made a loan to the Pittsburgh Waldorf School a couple of years ago, and it ended up that 30 people, teachers, administrators, alumni, came together to all do small partial guarantees of that loan, in addition to whatever fundraising the school was doing in the traditional way. And that's how we helped them to get the loan that they needed or wanted from us. And so that's one way. Another way is, and one of the most gratifying things for us is that we will frequently see organizations that are too early stage for us to make a loan, and we'll spend some time with them saying, here are the things we feel like we'd love to see you do, and then you could come back and come back to us again, in a year or 2 or a month or 5 years. And we just had an example, we've had an example of that recently, of a company that was in a garage when we went to go visit them, and we said we can't make a loan right now. They came back a couple of years later. We ended up making a $400,000 line of credit available to them, and they now have a $15 million line of credit just 5 years later. So that's pretty rare, and fast growth isn't at all what we need to see, but that just happens to be a potent example of it's really gratifying to us, because the time we spent earlier on trying to help them, just really out of an intrinsic interest in wanting them to do well, whether or not they get a loan from us. They ended up coming back to us and getting a loan, and it's been a great relationship. So I think there are probably organizations that we don't even know about where, whatever you want to call it, technical assistance or, care that went into working with them before they even had a loan with us, that they may have financed it in a different way, and we'll never know. And that's one of the hardest things about quantifying impact, and so we've had to develop our own unique way of doing social impact assessment here at RSF that we can feel good about, and we're still honing that. And I see that one of you that's on the call helped us design that, so thanks for that.
And he has a question for you.
Okay.
Which is, how do you assess the impact of, quote, direct, transparent, and personal transactions that are based on long-term relationships?
So this is a hot area. It seems like everyone wants to quantify social impact, and I think there's good reason for that. And I should, full disclosure, I'm the board of B-Lab that basically its whole purpose is to look at how to create standards for social and environmental performance, amongst for-profit companies. And so I've been very interested in this subject, and what we've had to do is design our own. So we actually use the B impact assessment. For those of you who aren't familiar, you can go to bcorporation.net. But we use the B-Lab impact assessment for all prospective borrowers. They have to fill that out, and then they have to fill it out annually. And this is a broad-based questionnaire that's open source on the site that I've seen companies use as a management tool in addition to access funding and other ways. And it's really helped us to look at, how serious is a company about their social environmental impact on the front end, and then how does that grow or not over time. And then we've developed our own social impact assessment for RSF as a whole that has 5 different layers. One layer is, we're looking at what effect are we having on the broader ecosystem of social finance organizations. We call that the network layer. Then we have a layer that's related to our borrowers and grantees and what impact they're having in the world. We have a layer related to our own investors and donors. And for instance, in our annual report last year, we had 800 people, 800 of our investors and donors respond to a questionnaire, and 77% of them said that their view of money and investing had changed fundamentally as a result of their being an RSF client. So that's sort of the middle layer, and then there's a layer related to our own organizational culture here at RSF, so our staff, and then there's a layer related to our financial impact. And so those are, we call it the layer cake affectionately, and we've had to design that ourselves because it allows for much more qualitative impact assessment than we could get through, for instance, the B social impact assessment. But we think highly of the work at B-Lab and have had tons of involvement with them.
Okay, so shifting gears again, this question is, can RSF be considered as another form of CDFI? And maybe you could take the opportunity to explain what a CDFI is and how indeed we are different.
Sure. So for those of you who don't know, a CDFI is a community development financial institution. This was set up as a class of financial institution some 30 to 40 years ago. And the idea was that many big banks were not providing loans or services in inner city areas and other places where they ideally should have been doing business. And so something was passed called the Community Reinvestment Act that essentially forces the big banks to put money aside that will then get lent out in communities that are underserved. And so this is a whole regulated process for the CDFIs, and and they do amazing work. I mean, I know many leaders of CDFIs out there, whether they're community loan funds or they're kind of small commercial banks, and they're doing amazing work. And so we see them as sister organizations because we don't receive any money from big banks or any other source except for from individuals and families and some current and alumni borrowers. So we don't have any institutional funding at all in terms of how that term is usually used, and it's not because we think that it's just categorically terrible to have institutional funding. It's just for us having this focus on direct, transparent, and personal requires us to stay really close to whose money it actually is that we're in charge of, or not in charge of, but that we're stewarding.
Another question about how we differ from others working in our field is specifically how we're different from the slow money movement. And if you could talk about what slow money is too.
Sure. So we're close with Slow Money. For those of you who don't know, Slow Money is an organization and really a movement started by Woody Tash. I highly recommend his book, Slow Money, that came out, I believe, in 2008. And I personally have known Woody for a long time. And there are a couple of activities that Slow Money is involved in. One there are basically networks or chapters around the country where there are local groups of investors that are coming together to see how can they put direct investments into small food and farming enterprises that meet up with Slow Money's principles. And I highly recommend looking at Slow Money's principles on their website. I believe it's slowmoney.org. And then the other is having gatherings like annual events where they're the kind of parent organization. Slow Money will convene these bigger events, and there'll be kind of a venture fair where companies will present in hopes to receive various kinds of funding. And I think they facilitated over $35 million in various kinds of funding to these small food enterprises between the networks and then Slow Money at large, over the last 5-6 years. And it's clearly something, his time has come based on the awareness about the local food movement, as well as people wanting to put their money towards things that are closer to home. Right? We're huge fans. We've been sponsors of Slow Money from the start, and they're one of a couple dozen organizations that we sponsor every year that we feel are doing important work to build the field.
Yes, we're looking forward to their national gathering in Louisville this November. So there's a question here, and this comes up a lot for those folks out there who are starting businesses. So this is knowing that funding from RSF is usually for enterprises with 3 years of operations. I'm wondering if there's any advice available for early startups to become ready, basically to prepare themselves for funding from RSF.
That's a great question, and per what I was saying before, you should contact us now because we'd love to track with your progress over time, because it makes it all the more impressive if you come to us now and say, I want to achieve this or that, and even if it takes a little longer than what was said at the beginning, it's still great to, as I was saying earlier, to see that progress, and it gives us even more confidence having known you for a while. And what we can do is provide some tips of avenues you might pursue for either equity funding or other types of financing. I don't want to say that we can offer a full-blown kind of assessment and consulting service to every organization that calls us, because we just can't. But we can try our best to provide whatever assistance we can, and then sending us a quick email every 6 to 9 months as you grow, we found to be a great way to get to know each other. And so that's a little bit vague. I mean, other comments, we could do like a 4-hour version of this call and go into a lot of detail about the kinds of specific things to focus on as an early stage enterprise. And a lot of us here have experience with that, but due to time constraints, I can't go into it in detail right now. But it's a great question.
Let's see, there's some questions here regarding granting, and there's one about donor-advised funds. If you want to just explain those a little bit more and
Sure.
how we work with them.
Sure. So for those that don't know, if you want to do more grant making than just, writing a $25 check to your local food bank or public radio station, every holiday season, if you want to do more than that, you have two choices fundamentally. One is that you can set up a private foundation with a board of directors and register that with the federal government and take all kinds of steps to get that set up. You can see my bias. Or you can set up a donor advised fund, which are offered by big organizations like Fidelity and Schwab, as well as community foundations, as well as organizations like Tides and Impact Assets and us. And so the donor advised fund is a way for you to get the tax benefit of setting up a philanthropic fund, and essentially you park those funds here at RSF, and we then help you with, you have what are called recommendation rights, and you call us up, email us, contact us, and say, I'd like for you all to send a check to XYZ nonprofit. If they're well known to us, we'll do it, that week. If not, then we'll do some diligence and that kind of thing. And then we will also provide kind of reporting, some tax and legal, work on the back end. So you don't have to go to the trouble of setting up a whole private foundation if that's not, it's not what you'd like to do. So that's what a donor advised fund is. And then typically, we've worked with clients who are investors here or are big fans of what we're doing in general, and we often will take the step to try and connect them with each other, where we see passions that one person has that may connect with someone else that they don't know, and we're always asking permission and whether people have interest in that kind of connectivity. But that's led to some pretty powerful grant making that's been done by 2 or more donor advisors to a single organization over time, and so that's basically what we do in the donor advised fund area. And we're the vast majority of the grants that we're facilitating, it's about $10 or $15 million a year now, are primarily in our focus areas of food and agriculture, education and the arts, and ecological stewardship.
You mentioned something, Don, in your opening remarks about how we're focused on potency and not scale. Mm-hmm. If you could elaborate on that a little bit.
Sure. Well, our overall culture, and especially in the culture of finance, is basically like for entrepreneurs, the message is how big can you get, how fast. And then for investors, our culture of money is basically how much money can I make in the shortest possible time. And so what we're interested in is trying to work with money in such a way that there's more, to use a phrase that Woody Tash coined a long time ago, that could be more called patient capital. And we're looking for projects like Common Market that I touched on earlier that Haile and Tatiana are very place-based entrepreneurs. They're not looking to franchise Common Market all over the country, and yet they're very interested in replication and helping others in an open source way to do what they're doing in other places. And so that's where we come from the small is beautiful school. We're looking for What kind of potency do those entrepreneurs have? What kind of intention are they bringing to their projects? And what kind of depth of relationships are they creating so that there's long-lasting value going on? And in our culture, it's hard because even as I've seen in the food and agriculture space, the tendency is everyone wants to apply like a venture capital mindset even to food. And food businesses and farms, you know, they really don't, it really doesn't work to provide shorter-term equity funding to them. It's not like software or biotech where you have a company that can grow really fast and get to huge scale. And so we just see ourselves as kind of a counterpoint to that school of thought, which is pretty pervasive, even in the nonprofit world, even in the impact investing world, which is basically around scale. Like how is this a scalable project? I mean, some meetings I have, if someone says scale once, they say it, you know, 15 times. Like that's like what they're after. And I often find that a lot of those organizations will burn out, you know, if they're growing too fast. It's not always. More impact doesn't always, or more scale doesn't always equal more impact, because you can also dilute from your core idea, and we're looking for those, you know, like, you know, Chris Manick, Waikiki that I mentioned earlier, or Haile and Tatiana, that you know, they're on the no dilution plan from their mission, and they'll grow a little slower if it means they can stay closer to their original intent.
Something else that you mentioned earlier was our shared gifting program, and someone's asking if you could elaborate on that.
Sure. So this grew, and you can go to our website and download a white paper that Kelly Buells wrote. She's the head of our philanthropic services team here on the subject of shared gifting. We, about 15 years ago, started working with a group of schools in the upper Midwest where there was a donor who was interested in supporting, in this case, Waldorf schools in the upper Midwest area, and said, instead of having these schools kind of compete for my money and for me to get, you know, 15 applications and for me to make the decisions, what I'd rather do is pull together these 15 schools, say, you know, here's a total amount of money that I'd like to make available, and why don't you all decide how you'd like for the money to be split up? And it's important to say that in that case, she said, you know, I'm going to come back next year and the year after, and, you know, with a similar amount of money. So what she was asking the schools to do is to say who had the most acute needs, and basically to talk with each other about what their needs were. And it's been really profound to see what's happened in that group. They've ended up collaborating on all kinds of things, you know, over the last 15 years based on the personal relationships. In addition to, it really changes the power dynamic in philanthropy when you have those who are receiving the funds to feel like they have some control over the process, and that's one of the main theses, you know, that Kelly puts forth in her white paper. And so we've gone on from that group to do, now we did a food and agriculture related group of nonprofits, you know, a shared gifting circle here in the Bay Area. We did one in the fall of last year in the Skagit Valley in Washington State. We're going to be doing another one in the Philadelphia area later this year. We're going to be doing a circle, shared gifting circle based on education and the arts in Los Angeles towards the end of the year. So that's the basic idea, but I encourage you, there's an article in the Chronicle and Philanthropy about this a couple of years ago when the white paper came out, and that's also a good summary of what it entails. And of course, you can contact me or Kelly or others directly if you want to learn more about that.
Great, thanks. We have about 5 more minutes, so we'll see.
Sure.
Maybe one last question, and this is regarding our regional focus. We are based here in San Francisco Bay Area. We don't have offices elsewhere, but we do work across the U.S. and Canada somewhat too, and we do have somewhat of a regional focus in some areas. So if you could just talk about that a little bit.
Sure. Sure. So I've mentioned a couple times in regard to the food systems work that we do, but in general, we're fans of local living economies here, and so as it pertains to that, we do have national scope in how we do our granting or loans that we're making and so forth. And we're increasingly interested in how we can focus on particular regions that are showing strength. And so for example, we've done a combination of grants, loans, and investments in the Hudson River Valley, based on a quickly advancing food system work there, and that's right outside New York City. But we've also been doing work in places like Louisville, Kentucky, and Little Rock, Arkansas, and Austin, Texas, and other places other than the sort of obvious coastal cities that you associate being closer to this kind of funding and financing. And we also have done some work, field building work, with community foundations over the last year, where we're looking to partner with them essentially in a given region to provide more dynamic, flexible capital to social entrepreneurs in those regions. And the community foundations are really interested in how they can do more place-based impact investing. And this is where we think it could be really powerful for us to learn from them and partner with them, because they're there on the ground, and then they can become more dynamic local financial institutions by doing things beyond grant making that are involved in loans or loan guarantees or things of that nature. So there's a whole community foundation strategy that we have as part of the regional work that we do, in addition to sponsoring and being very close to Bali and Slow Money and other organizations that are for whom this is their entire focus.
Okay, well, I think that's it for questions. Do you have any closing comments that you'd like to share?
Sure. It's just this is great. I hope it's useful for those of you on the phone. My email's on the website, as well as everyone else's here at RSF. And I hope, if you don't know us well, you can reach out and approach us with other questions or comments or feedback. One important thing is that we are really looking to find more borrowers that fit our criteria right now. And so if you know of super inspiring social entrepreneurs that fit the criteria that are on our site under our social enterprise lending part of our website, we'd love to hear from you. But thanks a lot for chiming in.
Thank you, Don, and thank you everyone for calling in and for all your great questions. I'm sorry we didn't have time to get to all of them. As I mentioned, we will be sending out a feedback survey tomorrow and would love to hear your thoughts on today, and also suggestions for additional similar type webinars, either topics that Don could address or other RSF staff members you'd like to hear from, or any other great ideas you have. Okay, have a great afternoon. Thanks so much.
Thanks all.